Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Felipe and I'm a planner.
Hello, everyone. I am also Felipe, and I am also a planner.
And today we are here to ease your World Cup hangover by taking some time to look back on the tournament and specifically at what happened off the field in terms of culture and ads. If you've come here for, amazing tactical analysis, I'm sure Felipe is an expert in that, but we'll maybe touch on that maybe at the end. But other than that, we're very excited to talk about a lot of, I think, just the very cool stories and culture that happened around the games, as well as I think some solid advertising, which we can get into whether Felipe agrees with that or not. So welcome everybody who is watching us or might be watching us on LinkedIn. This is our first time doing a live. So if you comment, I will probably be able to see it, but I'm not exactly sure I will. But if you want to drop a comment, do it, and I will take some time to check. And then for all of you sickos who watch on YouTube, anybody who actually follows us on YouTube, the hardcore fans, welcome as well because we're streaming on it as well. We have you can call this a little show, a recurring podcast called Felipe versus Felipe, which we post episodes on YouTube with a schedule of basically whenever we feel like it. Whenever we have something to say, we discuss something, we throw it on there. So feel free to find that on YouTube under my channel, Think Bait and Tackle. Um, Felipe, before we get started, is there anything you're trying to get off your chest? Or if not, we can get going here.
Yeah, I was actually excited to talk about Cape Verde's transition from defense to attack and their formations, but I guess we can talk about culture and advertising instead.
All right, fair enough. There'll be another podcast where you can talk about how they suddenly switched it up on Argentina and almost knocked them out of the tournament.
A break. Yeah, we need the technical ability to do one of those boards where we can see like the
Yes.
technical breakdown. But
I
yeah.
love those. I love those channels. Honestly, I mean that is not something I was planning to get into, but um that is part of the culture around the World Cup that I've enjoyed. It's not new to this year. I think it started probably 4 years ago, but there is a wealth of amateur tactical breakdown and analysis, and a lot of people who aren't necessarily in official positions know a lot about soccer, and I feel like I've learned a lot more about soccer in the last, call it, 3 to 4 years than I have my entire life. Um,
Mhm,
so there you go. That does have to do with culture. Tactics and culture sometimes do intersect,
mhm.
and that's a good segue to. I kind of wanted just to start broad. I have a lot on the menu. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of it or if there'll be time. I purposefully left the ads more toward the tail end, so we'll probably talk about ads. But if we don't have time, it's okay because I think that's been a big part of the conversation in general on LinkedIn and something that I think both you and I have talked a lot about just on our own. So I wanted to start a little bit more broad, just about cultural themes, and that could mean kind of almost anything. But when you think about things you've noticed when it comes to how the culture treats the World Cup or the maybe practices, whether it's from fans, from media.
Mhm.
What do you think? Does anything come to mind to you as far as maybe what's going to be the cultural legacy of this World Cup, if it has any, or any other
Yep.
takeaways you have from just how culture interacted with this tournament generally?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think the number one cultural theme that I found really interesting was in a World Cup where the product on the field was so good, right? Where all the stars were firing on all cylinders. I found that there was a lot of cultural focus on what was happening in the stands. And I
Mm,
think that's one of the elements that I found really interesting, the relationship between groups of fans and the pitch and the reaction and the focus and the attention that those rituals that were happening in the stands were garnering attention. I found it really interesting because normally a tournament where you have so many stories in terms of that reacted to the related to the actual product is gonna take center stage. But I found that I heard as much about Messi on the field as I was hearing about Norwegian fans rowing during the game, pre-game and post-game, right? So those rituals that were
Mm,
happening around fans and the stories around like Lumumba and DR Congo, right?
yes.
And all those different stories that came about, I found to be truly compelling. I think I can't remember this. This I think I was this is the 11th World Cup I've watched, or 10th or 11th World Cup I've watched. I can't remember another World Cup where there were so many stories of what was happening on the stands, other than 2010 South Africa with the Bubucelas, and that wasn't necessarily positive. So that's if I stay with one, I would say the stories around what was happening on the stands.
And now you have me trying to figure out how many World Cups I've watched. Probably a couple less than you, but not that many less.
Divide your age by four.
Oh, there you go. So about 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that is I think I hadn't really thought about that, but I think you're right because I do think back on other World Cups and I do remember certain things in the stands that took center stage here and there like but it was always like one. Like in 2010 there was like the really attractive Paraguayan fan. I remember she
Yeah.
became a phenomenon along with the vuvuzelas. I think Iceland had also like a cheer they used to do, but
Yeah.
this World Cup there was a lot going on, and I think in a way, I don't know what would be behind it, but the fact that there's just maybe a lot more time between when teams played because there were so many teams, maybe gave maybe it gave more opportunity for people covering those teams to think ahead of like what should you cover, you,
Yeah.
uh, what should you look out for in the stands. um I would say on my end I think there's a lot of cultural themes that cropped up, but for me the main one is that I think that I think this World Cup has now marked and proved that the US is a fully mature soccer market. I think the sport here is mainstream, in my opinion. It's not the sport of the future, and people keep talking about it that way, but the numbers had already kind of shown it to be as mainstream as, say, NBA or college sports, things like that. Anything except for the NFL, it was comparable to. And I think that the numbers were showing that even dating back to 4 years ago. But I do think that everything else kind of caught up as treating the U.S. Market as mature, and I think that's a through line throughout most of what at least I will talk about, but maybe you.
Mhm.
I think the ads reflect it. We can talk about
Yeah.
that later. Um, and I think just also like the audiences themselves, and so this is a bit anecdotal, but for example, I didn't see a lot of people who I know have been lifelong soccer fans trying to recruit new fans into the game the way that I saw in previous tournaments. And so, quick plug, I do have a course that I built
Mhm.
about marketing in soccer summer tournaments, the World Cup being the main one. And in
Mhm.
that, I have as one of the main tenets, one of the fan desires is the desire to recruit new people into the sport, at least when it comes to the US. And I think I'm going to have to probably change that or modulate that because I didn't see
Mm.
that as much. People definitely still want to recruit and have company, but it was more like, hey, when are we all going to get together? It assumed that people were already interested. There wasn't as much of the, hey, come on, give it a try. Let me spoon feed it to you, right? And then another signal I saw, again anecdotal, but in Chicago where I live, every single bar, every single restaurant was showing the games as a matter of course. Whereas
Mhm.
before, you were more likely just to see specialty soccer bars showing the games or sports bars showing the games. But as I was walking around, it was really pretty much anywhere and everywhere the games were on, in a way that I felt like I was in Latin America. Um, and not so those were the two things, along with I didn't experience this personally, but had people reach out and tell me that also they're starting to run into people being like gatekeepers and sort of
Mhm.
um, correcting or showing the annoyance with
Yeah,
newbies that
yeah.
you're more likely to see at a Super Bowl party or something. That again, I used to say no. Fans love newbies and they want to bring you in, but that might be shifting. So that's my
I
long way of saying I think the U.S. is a mature soccer market.
I think that's a great point, great observation. Even I was, as you were talking, I was even thinking about back not so long ago, a couple of World Cups ago, right? I'm gonna go on Peruvian. So Peru qualified to the World Cup in 2018. I mean, not so long ago,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, being a soccer fan was a little bit of a lonely experience. Right? You had to go. I remember being in Chicago and having to go to Fado to watch the games, and I remember the experience that we built in Leo Burnett around the 2014 World Cup, which was all built around the inability for us to actually get off work to be able to watch the games, right? And it was just harder, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was harder, and it was really niche, and it was really kind of concentrated. Obviously, we've worked in multicultural marketing, so for us, it was closer to even from a brand standpoint to understand that we were going to be related to those tournaments. Right now, it was everywhere, right?
Yes.
Everyone, and there's been a lot of interesting. Like if you take a look at the even the conversations on like sports shows that traditionally didn't cover soccer. There's even that discussion of the casual fan becoming a hardcore fan. Even people saying like, I love Erling Haaland. How do I continue to watch him? Right? Like where and people being like, oh, you need to watch him in Manchester City. I agree with you. It's you're starting to see it go mainstream, and the gatekeeping comes with that, right? When you see your favorite band all of a sudden kind of making it big, it's like I followed them from since their first album, right? So yes, definitely no longer a niche sport. It's one of the big mainstream sports in America for sure.
Yeah, I have to admit, even I had like at least a moment where I would hear somebody say something I thought was outrageous and felt the need to try to correct them. But um I'm not exactly happy about gatekeeping coming. I think because that's what I did. I think that is one of the things that used to be, or maybe is still to a certain degree, nice about soccer fans in the US is it's a little bit more of a welcoming environment, but maybe that's part of the the cost of growing and actually becoming a mainstream sport.
Yeah,
The other, so you mentioned the thing we did at the agency. So Felipe and I used to work at a multicultural agency embedded within a general market one, and it was a whole. We had like an internal cultural initiative where we threw viewing parties in conference rooms to recruit the general market agency workers to watch the World Cup and enjoy them with us. And it was bring food from the countries that were playing. It was very involved. It was very fun. I don't think that 12 years later, uh, you really need an initiative like that.
yeah, I agree.
All right. So now let's move on. You mentioned that one of the main thing you've noticed was, that there was a lot of focus on what was happening in the stands, maybe just as much as on the pitch. Whether it's stories from the stands or other cultural stories, do you have any favorites that you're going to remember most fondly? Or what was your favorite kind of cultural story around the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean the stories that were happening around like the days like the Scottish fans, right? I think what is the name? The Tartan
The
Army,
Tartan
I
Army.
think. Tartan Army, and particularly again beyond what they were doing in the pitch, like the coverage of the Tartan Army going to a Boston Red Sox game
Hmm.
and having soccer chants at the Boston Red Sox games, and actually getting players reacting to that, like baseball players saying like I've never played a game like that, right? So I started to see like soccer rituals starting to spill over not only to the
Hmm.
streets but to other sports, right? So I started to ask myself, is are we in a world where a couple of years from now you go to a baseball stadium and there are chants, right? And chants that are a little bit like more related to soccer chants, not the defense or those type
Right.
of. I know defense is more basketball than baseball, but uh, I think the Tartan Army kind of came to mind. Obviously, Norway and their fans. I think. Was definitely a big story for me, and then a lot of stories of. I would say that one of the reasons why I think there was such a tension to kind of what was happening on the stands, another hypothesis that I would have was there was a lot of tension kind of coming into this World Cup in terms of like how about how that cultural interaction was going to happen, right?
Yes.
Obviously, again, the World Cup happens. We don't need to get into the whole political thing, but it happens at a time of like heightened tension and tension in terms of how Americans were going to receive people from other countries, and then how other people from other countries were going to explore and experience the United States. And I think I was pleasantly surprised to kind of understand that it was like for 6 weeks it was like I want to find out more, right? Like tell me how you participate and how you explore, and I want to see how I can adopt it. And it happened from people in the US cheering on for the fans and kind of taking the row, and people like going into the Norwegian row, but at the same time from people from other countries like going to Bucky's, right? And seeing like gas stations in the United States, or taking ranch sauce back home, right? I studied in the Midwest and lived in the Midwest for a little while, so I can totally get the ranch sauce mania. But I would say a couple those are the elements that kind of come to mind more positively in terms of the of those cultural kind of expressions that were happening on the stands.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I agree. I think that probably I'm gonna bring up another story here just for variety's sake, but I
Mhm,
would say my favorite too was that cultural interaction, and you could almost sum it up as in a sense, um, the best of America shone through off the pitch. Well, maybe the worst happened on, or at least like in the official capacities around the pitch, right?
mhm,
Um, and I think it was a big tension point, and I think a lot of people were predicting that the World Cup wasn't going to do very well because let's keep it real, it's a time where there's just like hostility towards foreigners, at least from
mhm,
official channels in this country, and it came it was heartwarming to see how it sounds cliche, but the tournament does bring people together, and that is one of the things
yeah.
that is beautiful about it. Um, Before I get into mine, because it is gonna come up with like a little bit of a I'm gonna go on a little bit of a soapbox here in a second, but
Do it.
we have Veronica is commenting on here, and she asks if we did the Panini album. She says, I saw a shift in that from last World Cup to this one too. Lots more people engaged and more retailers involved. Stickers selling out, swap parties happening all around.
Mhm,
I bought or I got the album and I bought a few envelopes. For people who don't know, the Panini album is a sticker album where basically there's one page per team, and then there's a page for all the stadiums and some other types of stickers. And the game is to just collect and stick, get all the rosters
mhm,
full and things like that. It's a craze in Latin America. I think it's pretty big in Europe. It's kind of a growing thing here. Um, and this year, because there were so many teams, it was so expensive to
mhm,
to fill it. So I wanted to have it, but I just filled out a few things. I will say I didn't see the abundance of retailers. It was still kind of one retailer, at least in Chicago mainly, that carried it. But one of the advertising efforts I saw was McDonald's hosting swap parties, which I was like, man, finally.
yeah.
And I do think there was a little bit more acknowledgement of this as a thing from brands. And I do know a lot of people that got really into it. It's just, to keep it real, it was just a little bit more expensive this year. I had like an 11-month-old. My son turns one, so I had it until I got Lucho Diaz, from Colombia, and then I was like, good, I got what I wanted. And then I think I cursed him in the process. I am a little superstitious about bad consequences, and you don't feel it by the time the tournament starts. Did you do the panini?
I so I didn't fill it out completely this year, and we'll talk about cost because it's one like in the further themes we'll talk about cost overall of the World Cup as one of the lowlights for me. But I completely agree with that observation. I think the another proof point to your point of it going mainstream is how the Panini album kind of became mainstream, right? And because of the cost, I think that also kind of drove all these trade swapping parties and
Mm-hmm.
people getting together to kind of swap and content created. Like this is the first time I see videos saying like I filled out the album in one day, right? And brands like you say in McDonald's here. I'm in Puerto Rico right now, and here I don't know if it happened in the States as well, but here in Puerto Rico you would get like a special pack of a couple of stickers if you bought some type of of McDonald's combo. So I think when you go into those rituals and which were again very highly niche, right? If you think about a highly niche ritual related to the event, it's another signal that this thing is going mainstream. And yes, I can only like 2030, I can only or not even 2030, like next year with the Women's World Cup, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what is gonna happen there? It's one of those elements that are gonna like trading cards and trading albums are gonna become even bigger. So I think it's another great observation and another signal of how the sport has gone mainstream. I unfortunately did not fill it out completely, but Peru was not
Who's not in it? Yeah.
in the World Cup, so I wasn't that into it.
I love all the World Cups, but when Colombia's not in it, I'm way less likely to like put in effort or money into filling out the album.
Mhm.
Thank you for the comment, Veronica. And just so you know, anybody else commenting? Oh, Veronica says that at Walmart, Target, Home Depot, CVS, See, I only saw it in Walgreens. I actually went to Target to look for it because I used to see it there before, but maybe it was just in my thing. And that Costco
I
had
thought
a
that
special set.
like distribution was low a little bit at the beginning, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of it caught fire, and it was everywhere.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I can't wait for it to be like at least in Colombia where you can like get it like on the street corner, like people selling
Yeah.
newspapers.
Yep. Yep.
Um, by the way, anybody commenting, there is a little bit of a lag. I don't know, a couple minutes. So if we don't answer immediately, you know why. Okay, I want to share my favorite, I think, cultural takeaway from all this is a little bit, if you will humor me, it's a little bit of um a soapbox moment, but I really liked the reports, if true, and I think they are true, of Telemundo taking a lot of English language
Mm,
audiences from Fox. And the reason I like that story is not because I hate Fox or anything. And I don't have any affiliation with Telemundo, right? I've worked with them in the past, but like not really. But I think that that shift, I do think speaks to the level of audience sophistication when it comes to soccer. And I'll tell you why. Because
mm,
first of all, I think first of all, it's very telling at the beginning how each channel went about promoting the fact that they were carrying the World Cup, right? And Fox geared a lot of their promotion toward, it seemed to be geared towards spoon feeding people who don't like soccer as much, spoon feeding soccer to people who they feel they still have to convince to watch the sport, right? And they had a spot. It was a nice spot. You know, it was a really well made spot, but it was all about, hey, you should watch because what do you never know. The World Cup, the US might win the World Cup, right? Almost as if like assuming that people wouldn't watch otherwise. Whereas Telemundo, their marketing was pretty balanced and it was kind of just about the game itself, and they had the confidence of knowing that the game in a sense sells itself. They weren't trying to necessarily give you reasons tied to the US to watch, right? And
mhm.
and I think that like the so that's one thing is the focus on the US team, right? But then if you put that aside also for like a second, there's also the way that each channel actually executed covering the games. And so you have on one hand, you have um, Telemundo. You know, you got to give them a lot of credit. And again, I'm not affiliated with them, but they really know the art of narrating soccer, right? They tell you what's happening as you see it. They modulate their voice and their tone according to how close somebody is to scoring, which I did hear from people who don't speak Spanish. They like that because they could be in the other room watch doing something else, and then they would get a sense from the narrators when something was about to happen, right? And they punctuate that emotion with catchphrases and things like that. Then for context around the game, they would use kind of like deader or dead ball periods for that. And they would also, banter a little bit, give you some nice analysis. It was a very pleasant viewing experience, and I think they let the game sell itself and just added to the enjoyment of it. Whereas Fox, again, in my opinion, Fox did something that I think a lot of American sports media tries to do, which is even just aside from the US, they kept trying to it felt like they kept trying to sell narrative and stakes and kind of tell you at all times of the reasons you should care, right? They were shoving narrative into everything, which again, I think is something that is very typical of US sports media. And maybe it's something that fits when covering other sports, but I think it kind of clashes with soccer itself
Mm,
because soccer is very fluid. At any moment, things are happening. There's not as much built in dead time to talk about the player's backstory and this and that. And you have
mm,
to be
mhm.
skillful about how you do it. So you have commentators and play by play people who this happens all the time and it gets so under my skin. Say somebody's on a fast break and then they're like on a fast break about and you're seeing whether they're going to score or not, the commentator is very apt to say something like, is this the moment that they break through, or is this the moment he cements his legacy, right? Trying to sort of tell you about the stakes and tell you why what you're watching is important and not really letting you get lost in it. And I'm just like, dude, shut up. Like, you're taking me out of it. For all you nerds out there, it's like you're taking me from system one to system two, and you're making
Yeah.
me think about something that you're taking me out of the moment. And I had to get that off my chest. But in summary, I feel like Telemundo is maybe they're just more seasoned and more used to just designing their coverage so that the sport can breathe and sell itself and complementing it. Whereas Fox, I think Fox was a little bit still too much into like the we need to tell you why this is awesome and important mode. And I think
Interesting.
taking you out of it. So
Interesting.
thank you
Yeah.
all for listening to that little TED talk. But I do think that is I think that's part of what's behind it, and I'm hoping that in whoever gets the rights next time, I think they'll take. I hope that they can design their coverage with a little bit more confidence that people want to watch soccer. You don't have to awkwardly tell people why they should do it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I only watch the sport in Spanish, so I didn't see Fox's coverage. I The only Fox content I consumed was the Zlatan and Titi Henry analysis, but I saw that on YouTube post game. So
Same here.
but yeah, it was interesting. There was a lot of English speakers that were consuming Telemundo, so I think it's going to be interesting to see Telemundo's like how many non-native Spanish speakers are going to watch El Señor de los Cielos
Yeah,
now.
yeah. I'm curious about it. I've never watched it, and
I
yeah.
mean, we heard it for a month and a half.
Yeah. There should honestly like free idea for them. They should have some sort of they should experiment with some subtitling it or dubbing it or giving an option for people who because just to be clear, it's not just that Telemundo took like people who speak both languages, right? But maybe are English preferred. They had people who don't speak a lick of Spanish covering it.
Yeah.
So that's And I think a lot of people like to say that it's because they didn't go to commercial during hydration breaks. I'm sure that helps, but I think it's in the overall philosophy of how you cover soccer
Yeah,
personally. You know,
agree.
someone might see this and be
Hmm.
like, you don't know what you're talking about, but I do. I felt that. I really did feel that that was the case. All right.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you want to touch on this. If I can get to my my old control screen here as we're building this. There we go. Um, we can talk about advertising in a second, but I don't know if you wanted to touch upon something that you and I talked about before this and off air, which was also the story of diasporas and how it was interesting that a lot of teams, especially in Africa and I think some teams in Asia as well, had players like the bulk of their roster were players that weren't actually born in that country, but that lived in Europe or in the US or in other countries and had family ties. And how,
Hmm.
and sometimes teams would find them on LinkedIn and say, hey, like, would you like to come play with us? People who I think under old assimilation models, you'd expect to not feel any connection to their parents and their grandparents' original country, but but who, for whatever reason, whether it's because they felt like they had a better chance to play, but even for some that I know at least a few who got recruited, say by France, but decided to
Hmm.
play for Ivory Coast instead or for Senegal instead. I think it speaks to the power and the hold of the culture of their diaspora. And I know you like to talk a lot about this in terms of how, you know, maybe people historically tend to think of countries like the US or Europe as exporting culture and then kind of attracting, immigrants that way. And now this seems to be something a little bit of a it suggests a little bit of a reversal in terms of the culture of diaspora countries, Latin America, um, Puerto Rico. I know is part of the U.S., but I
Yeah.
would count that as well as of maybe now those maybe the U.S. and other countries becoming, if not net importers of culture, at least it having it be more balanced where culture and from other, let's call it smaller countries, countries you don't think
Hmm.
of as powerful, having a lot of influence, a lot more influence than they used to have.
Yeah, I think, I mean, without getting into immigration and history and everything like that, I think we're getting to a point where technology has allowed that the flow of culture and influence is changing dramatically, no? To your point, like I think there's a report that actually talks about like yearly about like some a term called soft power, which is like the power that countries hold over other countries, but are more like related to their influence, right? Not political or military power, but actually how you influence other countries. And traditionally, I think we have these countries that are seen as exporters, to your point of culture and influence, right? I think we're moving away from that. I think there's technology. I think there's a lot of other dynamics that are kind of changing how people relate to culture and to countries, and I think that has an impact in terms of how players adapt and connect and identify with countries, and now they have the choice to play for different countries, right? I am Peruvian, but I live in Puerto Rico, so I have for me, it's a lot more natural to see this experience of like players choosing to play for their country of their parents' origin, right? In Peru, we have to export players like that because we're not the best soccer team in the world, so we've had to nationalize players or look for players of origin. So that's normal for us. Puerto Rico obviously has a really interesting dynamic with the US. So there's relationships there in terms of the players that we choose. But I think seeing stories like for example the French player Michael Olise, right, and he had like 3 or 4 different countries that he could choose from, right, and he chose to like now he has the ability not only to choose for the team that I think is going to have given the best chance to win, but also what he identifies, the country and the team that he identifies with, right? And I think more and more we're going to be able to see players not only choose to go play for a country they because they couldn't make, like for example, a French-born player going to play for an African country because they're not good enough to cut it in the French team. No, it's gonna be more and more players to choose to represent the countries that they feel the most identified with, and I think that's only going to benefit the sport. I think that's only going to be beneficial. Like we see it, I think it benefits cultural expressions like music and everything. The more we can get access to cultural expressions from a lot of different countries, I think it's going to benefit the sport because it's going to make it more equal, and we're going to be able to see stories like Cabo Verde, like DR Congo, right, where we're starting to see those teams that are going to be represented by really great players that now have the ability because they find that cultural connection. So more to come. I don't know where that's going. I again, as the tournament expands, we're gonna get to see more stories like that, I think.
Yeah, I personally hope that that if this does become more of a thing of players, countries wanting to recruit players of their diaspora to play for them, that it softens the attitude I think that people in Latin America tend to have towards uh, Latinos and Hispanics who are born in the U.S. or in maybe Europe, of like being very dismissive and not Latino. They're trying to tell them that they're not Latino. Um, you know, I sort of straddle both. I spent a lot of time in Latin America, but I have family members and things like that who catch a lot of grief. So I'm kind of hoping, especially, hey, anybody in Colombia, be nicer, be more inclusive, because you never know. You might have somebody who becomes really good at soccer, and you want to be nice and welcoming to have them play on your team. They probably
Yeah.
won't grow up in the U.S. if they're good at soccer, but like Europe, you got to be inclusive. I had to put that in there. Okay. I did not ask you about or give you a chance to talk about your least favorite cultural story if you have one. I don't really have one. So
I have one.
okay, tell me.
I think the whole discussion around the economics of the World Cup, right? Ticket costs, cost for food and drinks, right? I have friends who went to games and they paid like $23 for a beer inside a game. I think the ticket costs for the final were ranging in 4 to 5 figures, right? And I think it's an interesting contradiction right now where we're seeing the sport being more widely adopted by a lot of people, but then the access to the event was highly exclusive, right? It was ridiculously expensive to be able to access the match, and a lot of people said, "Oh, that's just dynamics of like supply and demand because of how the amount of demand that happens in the United States." And but no, I think it was dangerously close to getting to a place where you're pricing out uh, real fans that actually put that amazing environment on the stands, right? I've seen a couple of videos from content creators that went to the final, like Argentinian content creators that went to the final, and they were like in the nosebleed sections around people that didn't even know the rules of the sport, didn't know the chants, didn't know it was a very corporate crowd, right? And that's normal when you get into the finals and everything like that. But and again, no one is going to ever accuse FIFA of being a benevolent organization that is looking out for the interest of the common person. But I think it's a sport that needs to find its way in terms of making it accessible for every person, right? So that would be the for me that would be the one low light in
Mm-hmm.
terms of just the overall cost of how people like the stories that I'm hearing about people like the amount of money that they spend to be able to just go watch a game. It was obscene.
I agree. I to be, I guess, a little fair to FIFA. I mean, not they could not do this, but that
So that's the first time you've ever said that, I
I
think.
believe the
Oh,
corporatization aspect, I think it's happening in a lot of sports.
Mhm.
I think a lot of sports are becoming at least a little bit less accessible, which, not to come down too hard on FIFA or anything, I personally did not love like their approach to their design of the logo. You know, there's people who like it. I don't think it was horrible. But if you look at past tournaments, it used to be more whimsical. And I think the culture of fandom used to kind of seep into the official posters and the official, right? And I think as you make everything more expensive, to your point, you're letting a little bit less of that influence into the stands, and a little bit of that, less of that fan influence into the sports culture itself. But I would be lying to you if I didn't feel that way about almost every major sport. Um, as an aside, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's
No.
why I enjoy women's sports a lot these days, is
Yeah.
because they're still priced accessibly enough that you get a lot of people who, common people get to shape the culture of the event.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think it's not exclusive to this sport. I would say that, and maybe it's because of my relationship to this sport, but I think this sport is the sport that its relationship to the crowds, and I talked about it at the beginning, it's conducive to the overall experience, right? In every sport, right? But I can watch a basketball game and I'm not really concerned to see if the crowd is chanting or doing anything, right? I'm more concerned about the product on the stands. I think I'm sorry, in the court or on the court. I think football, soccer, like the environment, the chants, the fandom around it makes the experience. It's a vital part of the experience, right? And I think if we are okay with just remember watching football, like watching football games during the pandemic, and it was just great. It was weird. It was weird. It was weirder for
Hmm.
me to watch that than watch basketball or baseball. I could basketball or baseball were more. I miss the crowd less.
Yeah,
So that's why I think yes, the corporatization of all the sports, it's happening everywhere, and entertainment as well. I think this is the sport that if I were working for FIFA, I would be a lot more worried about making sure that the environment in the stands doesn't lose that essence because it's a vital part of the experience.
totally right. You sold me completely. And I
Mhm.
will, you mentioned before that it would be fun if soccer culture spilled into other sports. I don't know if this is how the order of how it happened, but I don't know if you've ever seen like clips of professional basketball in Eastern Europe and things like that. And it's like indoor and people have flares.
Exactly.
That is awesome. And I just like,
That's crazy.
and I do, you and I both grew up watching South American soccer, and it's a little grimier, and but that's like the griminess and like the fact that like people in the stands are a little bit nuts within reason. I actually don't like
Yeah.
sometimes when they get violent,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
throwing a little something, paper, flares, that stuff is really cool. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that needs to happen everywhere that soccer is played, but I would even say even the equivalent of culture of soccer culture here in the States, which looks very different, but it has its own charm. I think
Yeah.
it's all, you're right, it's all in danger of getting iced out or locked out.
Mhm.
Okay. We got about 20 minutes, so we can unless you have anything else burning to say about culture, we can always go back. Let's
Mhm.
switch gears or switch lanes here to just talk about the advertising, the marketing that you saw from brands, or even from FIFA itself, however you want.
Yep.
Any themes that you saw, takeaways you have, and I can start just because I
Yeah.
have
Go for it.
less of
Mhm.
like a tirade to go on here. It's quicker, but I think maybe it'll set you up. Um, I think that my my overall assessment of the advertising I saw around the World Cup, specifically in the US, there was a lot of great stuff in other countries as well. But I was very heartened at seeing how advertising in the US did show a level of soccer knowledge and sophistication that I think it was a much higher level of that than in past tournaments. Uh, just as an example, a lot of ads felt confident putting in little jokes, Easter eggs. I saw a lot of 7-to-1 jokes at the expense of Brazil, which is kind of funny.
Mm,
Like even, but like
mm.
an Easter egg, like somebody in an elevator hitting
Wow,
seven, and it
interesting.
was cool that they felt like they could just put that there, not have to explain it, and to the point where the ads that were explicitly about Americans being noobs or not liking soccer, which there was a couple, and I thought they were like pretty fun and charming, but they did kind of stand out to me as like, ooh, this feels a little bit outdated, a little bit out of touch, like
Mm,
you're running like you're running like a playbook from 15, 20,
yeah.
years ago. So I thought there was a big level of sophistication in that sense. I thought there was a lot of good thinking about not just what soccer is and soccer versus football and all that stuff, but the World Cup as a place for cultural exchange. There were some ads with that thinking. There was a lot of ads about the World Cup as a holiday that you're trying to kind of like go on vacation for or find ways to not
Mhm.
work. I saw a lot of that this year where I hadn't seen the tournament treated that way before. I will say maybe as a drawback, I don't know if we'll look back at this World Cup and think that the creative firepower was like, I think it was a lot of good thinking. The creative
Mhm.
execution maybe wasn't quite there, and a lot of that sophisticated thinking seemed to be shared by a lot of brands, and a lot of brands seem to be doing similar things or talking about similar things, which I know is something you mentioned to me, something you noticed. So I don't know if you have
Yeah.
anything to add about that or examples.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest takeaways from me from a marketing standpoint are more like brand actions or branding elements that happen more than actual ads, right? Like I really like the Adidas commercial that launched prior to the World Cup. Enjoyed that as a piece of content, but I think I I can think of like three more branding actions that kind of are the ones that stuck to me for this World Cup. From a brand standpoint, I thought the Levi's brand act that they did with the Levi's Stadium, I thought it was brilliant, right? I thought it was, again, the context on that is all non FIFA sponsors or sponsorships or branding had to be taken off the stadiums, and most stadiums in the US are branded by corporations. The stadium in San Francisco is actually called Levi Stadium. So they had to literally cover the Levi's branding. And what Levi's did was actually cover the branding, but in the shape of their logo. So it was even recognizable, even though the brand name was covered. And then they took that and put that, like they took that image and brought that into their social media channels. So again, just an example of the power of distinct brand assets, which for all our Byron Sharp fans here, they're going to be excited about. But I thought again, clever way to prove to the point that when you're consistent and you have a distinct brand asset, even if you cover it, people are going to recognize it, right? So that action I found was really interesting. The second action that I'll just briefly talk about, and this is just me personally because it was an interesting. Like I thought the uniforms, the kits, particularly
Mm,
the Adidas kits, were gorgeous.
mm-hmm.
I, and you're starting to see like how that also kind of that's for me is an expression that moved from the sport into culture, right? The Mexico kit completely sold out, right?
Yes.
Sold out. I thought there were some beautiful kits, beautiful uniforms, like the Spain alternate white kit. It's just gorgeous. And you're starting to, there was a lot of content around how soccer jerseys are even becoming fashion statements, and you can dress them up and dress them down. And it's just because, again, there was like from a design standpoint, I thought there were some beautiful kits, but at the same time, there was a whole discussion around pricing of the kits, right? And how they're more expensive. So the whole counterfeit discussion that for us it's in Latin America, it's traditional, right? That
Yeah.
you have the original or the fake one. There's even like there's a discussion happening right now where like Rafa Nadal actually celebrated the Spanish win, and people are starting to say that the shirt that he had on was actually a fake.
You can't afford it, man.
Eh,
They're that expensive.
exactly. So I mean, there's an industry around counterfeit soccer jerseys and everything like that, which I found interesting. Which again, it also happens when you become like part of fashion, right? When you become part of culture, right? And there was some beautiful like I normally don't buy kits that are like from other countries so other than Peru. Like there would be like 5 or 6 shirts that if I find the right counterfeit store, I would proudly wear and buy if they were not $150
Yeah.
each. And then the final story that I wanted to share is the whole story of what happened with pink boots, right?
Yeah.
It was interesting when you started like you turned on the first game and all of a sudden 80% of the players were all wearing pink boots and you thought like, oh, which brand is that? It turned out it was every brand. Nike, Adidas, Puma, New Balance, even Skechers, all of the brands landed in that the World Cup boots were going to have this electric pink color. So
And they
people
did so
started to
separately
notice.
to be
se-
to be clear,
It,
because
it,
I thought that
it
maybe
was, yeah,
I thought that they had collaborated at first. No, they came at this conclusion separately.
they came at this conclusion separately. It was not a coordinated effort. And no, it backfired against them because in their attempt to stand out, right? Because I'm guessing, again, the story is that a couple of years ago, this trends company basically said that electric fuchsia was going to be the color of summer 2026. I'm guessing every company read that report. They landed on the spot of saying like, "Oh, let's make our boots electric pink." They obviously easy to recognize against the color of the pitch, easy to recognize on TV and on a small screen. But then because they all landed on the same color, it was very hard to tell one brand from the other, right? So just an interesting kind of example and an exercise on trend reports and how we take those and then transform them into branding and marketing decisions and kind of getting into the place where in their attempt to be different they every brand landed on the same place. So I cannot tell you like which boot I'm not in the market for buying football cleats right now,
Hmm.
but I couldn't tell you which one was the one I enjoyed the most because they were all the same.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, I think we can maybe go there. This isn't the topic of this, but like, there's a chance that they all separately asked AI, "Hey, like, what's the best way to break through?" And maybe there was that one trend report was maybe heavily cited by AI. And then AI also told them to cast David Beckham in their ads. Everybody told everybody to cast David Beckham in their ads. So, I'm not an expert in how that works, but you do it's interesting. If AI is behind a lot of these decisions, then not just for soccer, but for just in general advertising, you can expect the thinking to get maybe a little bit better because people have the capacity to explore more things, and AI doesn't get tired the way the human brain does. And yet you can maybe expect it to get more uniform if people aren't going that sort of extra mile of, I don't know, trying to not do the obvious thing AI tells them to do. And I say that just because, as an aside, there are the first few studies now coming out showing how AI seems to be driving a uniformity in how people write and a little bit of a uniformity in how the types of ideas that get expressed just by people in writing. So I wouldn't be shocked if this was kind of part of it too. Everybody's sort of drawing from the same, and if you want to take AI out of it, everybody's drawing from the same sources. That was very evident in
Mhm.
in in
Yeah.
in, in this. Um, Another nitpick I want to have, actually, it's not a nitpick. I think it's kind of a big miss. is that as much as I enjoyed the thinking in a lot of the ads, I was disappointed by how I didn't really see anybody do a campaign that they planned to evolve over the course of the tournament, right? And this was a very long
Mm.
tournament. It was 40 days.
Yeah.
Um, I know that in another podcast you and I did, I gave an honorable mention to Mala Suerte by Allstate for best campaign of all time, and you laughed at me, rightfully so. But part of the reason I love that campaign, and in full disclosure, I was loosely involved in it, but I liked that campaign because the creative team did come up with ways to deliver on the core theme of the campaign, but they came out with new ways to deliver it as the tournament went on, right? And it was a
Mm.
highly participatory campaign back when social media was a lot more participatory. Um, so maybe it also says to that. But I was a little disappointed by the lack of campaigns that evolved and
Mm.
by the lack of kind of participatory campaigns. I really hope that that makes a comeback. With that said, I do need to give Michelob a small shout out because they did have the day after the World Cup a really nice tribute to Messi, um,
Mm.
in the form of like it was somebody printing a bar tab, and the bar tab was showing all his accomplishments. It was really well done, and you could tell that they had planned ahead that they were going to
Yeah.
do that. And they probably had a version had he won, and then the version that showed because he lost the final. So, there was some thinking ahead, but I think in that department, people just kind of did the one thing they wanted to do and then left it at that. And so by the end, I mean, I knew all the ads by heart. It was, you know, I enjoy ads that evolve, and I have seen in past World Cups, not just work I've been involved in. This is not just about me pumping up myself, although that's something I like to think about. But I've seen a lot of my favorite work from past campaigns has been campaigns that take advantage of the lower production costs that exist today and give you
Mm.
content that kind of grows or somehow changes as the tournament goes. It gives you something to follow. I think that's a very effective tactic or way to go about it that I don't I didn't see too much. You already did touch on your favorite brand work. Some comments on that. I also enjoyed the Levi's stunt. I'm not gonna lie to
Mhm.
you. At first, I was like, "This is that typical campaign that everybody on LinkedIn loves," and then real humans don't. But I saw real humans talk about it, and then thinking about why it resonated so much, I have a theory, and the theory is that it's kind of a small but still a finger in the eye of FIFA, right? I think people have
Yeah.
this dual desire of you want the World Cup to go well as a fan. You don't want it to flop, right? Because you love the World Cup, we love the World Cup, and we want it to be entertaining and we want it to do well. But you also people, I think most soccer fans want things to not go FIFA's way. So this was one
Yeah.
little bit of catharsis where like ooh, a brand found a way to kind of get by FIFA and stick it to them even just a little bit. Um, so that's my theory on that. Aside
Yeah.
from that,
Yeah.
I want to I want to give a shout out to a few brands that I thought had really cool ideas. I think these are my favorite ideas, but not necessarily favorite campaigns, right? Because I think you have the Adidas and the Nike spots and all that, and Brahma that were just executed really well. And then and I'm gonna list a couple campaigns that I really like the thinking, and I think they have a lot of potential that I wish were blown out a little more. But Heineken had a program where people could take paid, like use their volunteer hours to get out of work, and they would link you with organizations that you could go volunteer at, and those
Mm.
organizations would pledge to have the game on. I thought that was so smart, and I thought that that
Mm.
could, in theory, be what I call like a god tier level type of work that could become a tradition in future World Cups. But aside from the announcement video and the website, I didn't see them like that's the type of thing that would have called for maybe extra content or maybe show a watch party at a food pantry or whatever. They didn't blow it out. Same with
Yeah.
Huggies. Huggies had a campaign in the fall, the social campaign
Mm.
where they were telling people hey, if you want to have a baby, start making it now so that it can be
Mm,
born in time for you to take parental leave during the
parental
World Cup.
leave.
And if you do, we'll give you free diapers. And they had fun YouTube videos that were
Yeah.
like 90-minute cuts of like baby making music. It was fun.
Mhm.
But again, it's not, they didn't really do much with it once the World Cup started. But I feel like that could be something where it's like, those are the types of things that like along with a Panini album can be, or along with knowing that Nike and Adidas are going to drop their hype spots before, they can become part of like how people like the tradition, right? And then since you hated the price inflation so much, Air Transat had a really, you guys have to look it up, a really clever out of homes where it was the line on the soccer pitch, like the sideline, and it said watching Portugal, I don't know, $5 million, however much it
Yeah,
costs.
yeah,
And then it turned into the line that the jet stream that the planes leave in their wake.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Go to Portugal or see Portugal,
Smart, smart.
um, $600. So, anybody else you want to give a shout out to,
I,
or
I think Huggies, and I don't know, like it's hard to understand if this was real or not, but I think they did something like a follow up on the. I think they had like a Times Square ad the day of the final or after the final, where it was like they took the image of the famous image of Leo Messi bathing Lamine Yamal.
mm-hmm.
So it was that bassinet type thing, and the line was like they grow up really fast, like basically saying Lamine Yamal already like we were seeing this picture of him being bathed, and now he's a World Cup champion, right? Enjoy it. Like I don't know if that was like coming from the brand or if it was like like someone doing it online, but I thought it was a smart kind of connection to that overall campaign that you did, and I think I don't know. I think here's the thing. Like I experienced the World Cup from Puerto Rico, watching it via Peacock,
Mm-hmm.
and so I didn't I wasn't experiencing the ads very much live there. I would also take to your point. I would give a shout out to Telemundo. Right, they made a point of saying differentiating themselves because they didn't go to break during the dehydration breaks, right?
Yes,
So they called that out.
they
Again, it was
did.
sponsored. The hydration break was sponsored, but they made a point of saying like we bring you the hydration break ad free, which again I think it connects a little bit to your point of knowing the tension points of like real soccer fans and being like even though people are accepting the hydration break, and I actually enjoyed it.
I love the hydration break.
People
Yeah,
are not gonna like real soccer fans are not gonna accept us cutting from the game and going to commercials, right? So I thought again another kudos to Telemundo there in terms of how they incorporated the experience there. And yeah, to your point, like I more than kudos, I would say like I'm a little bit concerned about Nike, for example. Like the Nike ad was enjoyable enough, right? Like it came out after Adidas, and I thought Adidas was better, but like I look forward to Nike as not the main sponsor of the event always found a way to hijack the event and
mm-hmm.
take it
Mm-hmm.
over, right? And again, I don't know if we're at a time where we're not having those like monoculture type things, right? And there was a like I liked what Nike did with Travis Scott, and they like Travis Scott actually like through his Cactus Jack events, they actually every day of the game he would actually put gear, Nike gear, like through his branding and the branding of the country. So small actions there that were a little bit interesting, but I think overall Nike as a brand that had their pulse on culture, not only for soccer, it's happening elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just another symptom of a brand that's kind of struggling to kind of find its way and really kind of join the cultural conversation. So I honestly can't remember it. Maybe it's me that I need to go revisit, but I can't remember that ad. I can't remember that film. It was fun, but I can't remember it.
I did like it a little bit more, I think, than you. I remember it had a
Yeah.
lot of cool Easter eggs. It was a lot of the ads were like a commentary too on Hollywood because I think just people associate that with the US as the host. But but I still agree with you. It's I don't know. Even in the way they did cut downs for TV, Adidas versus Nike, Adidas was a lot smarter about it. They thought I had Nikes. It was
Mhm.
a little haphazard. We are a little bit over, so in like, but I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna. This is a good segue into a lightning round because I wanted to ask you what if you had any like hopes for the future as like we go into the women's tournament next year, and then even if you want to think as far as ahead as 2030, in terms of maybe what you would tell or urge brands to do versus not. And since we are talking about those hype videos and the move videos, um, I it's not that I hope for them to
Go for
go
it.
away, but they
Yeah.
are kind of like action movies in the sense that it's really hard to make a good action movie because there's so many and everything has been done. And it's hard. I think the benefit of making like flashy moves, in the hotel and then in the street and this and that. I think the benefit is you actually are risking doing wallpaper for that, like becoming wallpaper because so many brands do it. And you're not Adidas and you're not Nike. You're probably not going to do it as well as them. So I would kind of hope that I get it. Those videos, like that format, that genre of ad and content, it was so breakthrough 3, 4 World Cups ago. And it's so tempting to do it. But I'm
Yeah.
just kind of hoping we find some new forms, like maybe the way teams did roster announcements and got creative with those NFL style, actually, incidentally.
Yeah.
Like maybe brands
Those are
can
great.
collaborate on that. I just think we need to explore some new formats. So that would be my hope slash advice as we kind of move forward from here. You have any
That's
parting
great.
thoughts?
Yeah, mine would be for brands to not fall in the trap to think that they need to think about 4 years from now. Brands need to start thinking about what their plans are going to be for the Women's World Cup next summer.
So true. It's I'm
I
not
hope
yeah.
my hope is that we're having this conversation next summer because brands figured it out and they said, you know what, the women's game is growing like crazy, amazing players. It's a way to get into the sport right now in a place that's not so overcrowded. And so I'm hoping there's as much hype, hard to for right now, but and that as much hype for the event that's going to happen in Brazil next summer. So it's
Mhm.
going to be
Mhm.
fun. And for brands to not fall in the trap of saying like, "Oh, we have 4 years now to plan what our World Cup action is." No, they need to start thinking right now about how they're going to support and really set themselves apart next summer during the Women's World Cup.
I agree. I personally plan on like exploring that over the next few months. Maybe we can have a conversation. I want to bring other voices in as well who like are seasoned in that. But for now, I will just leave people with in doing research for the course I put together. I looked at viewership numbers and I was very surprised, honestly. Like I've always enjoyed the Women's World Cup, but I was surprised at how actually large the viewership was. It's not quite the same as the Men's World Cup in the US, but for it's a little bit more driven by the US team. So for women's US games, those
Yeah.
those numbers were comparable. And for the final, it was kind of comparable to a lot of mainstream sports. And this was in a tournament that was in Australia that was like in the crazy hours in the US.
The
So
hours. Yeah.
so I do think that this is the as we were saying that the US for men's has become like a mature market. I think the women are like that kind of now fun growing opportunity that's pretty mature in the US compared to other countries.
Mhm.
It's kind of the inverse, but
Yeah.
I still think has like room to grow and that might be the next thing that gives you a lot more bang for your buck because people
Yeah.
sometimes can't get over their biases and they need a few decades to see that something works. So a little advice for brands: get into the women's game for sure. Okay, and then the last
Mhm.
thing, just lightning round, maybe in a sentence or two. Any takeaways you have from the actual soccer, good or bad, that you want to get off your chest?
I all good. I never want to not be surprised by Leo Messi.
Mm.
I It makes no sense. The World Cup he had. It makes no sense. And I want to never be it's a double negative. I don't know what sense. I always want to be surprised by what he's doing. So I hope I get to see him in another World Cup 4 years from now.
Wow.
I would have like I remember 4 years ago saying like this was it, and look at the World Cup he just had. So yeah, that's me. How about you?
Okay. I think I was very pleasantly surprised by the jump in quality of play from a lot of teams from Asia and Africa. Japan and Morocco both come to mind. Morocco
Yeah,
specifically, they were playing so fluid, so technically gifted,
yeah,
where they had a deep run 4 years ago, but it was like playing really defensive and like not
yeah,
necessarily. I think that this expanded format, you could think how you might feel a certain way about it, but one thing that I think is undeniable is that now finally Africa, I think Africa sending more countries into the World Cup was warranted based on the level of play that is happening over there. And
yes,
then
definitely.
maybe at the cost of um or to the detriment of South America, which I think once Messi retires, I believe South
We're in
American
trouble.
soccer is heading for some dark times for
We are
now.
in,
We can talk about why
we are in
that's
trouble.
happening, but I did
Yeah,
not feel good, even though Colombia, whatever, made it to the and sure. I don't. I feel like
we
we
are.
are in as a region in a little bit of decline, and if we don't watch ourselves, we won't even be able to use the U.S. as our punching bag anymore. So with that, um, I want to thank everybody who tuned in and watched. Thank you, Felipe, for making the time.
Thank you, Felipe.
This live format is kind of fun. Maybe we can do it special events maybe once or twice a year. Well, maybe we'll do it for the Women's World Cup certainly next year. But until then, thank you everybody who tuned in on both LinkedIn and YouTube. Find us Felipe versus Felipe. You can find us on the Think Big and Tackle YouTube channel if you want to see when we put normal episodes up. And other than that, have a great afternoon, everybody, and see you all at the very latest in Brazil 2027.
Thanks, everyone.
And let me end the stream and end here on.